You don't have a place here anymore. Don't you see? We need space, privacy. You suffocate this family. Stephanie's words hit me like a physical blow, sharper than any knife. I just stood there, clutching the carrot cake, the one Chris has loved since he was a little boy, feeling its weight, its sweetness, become a heavy, bitter stone in my hands. Her face was contorted, a mask of anger, and something else I couldn't quite name. Behind her, Chris just stood, silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. It was his birthday, and I, his mother, was being told I didn't belong. You're probably wondering how it came to this, how a mother, who dedicated her life to her family, found herself standing on her son's doorstep, unwelcome. To understand this ache, this profound sense of displacement, I need to take you back to where it all began. My name is Brenda. I'm 67 years old, a widow for almost 30 years now. When my husband, Frank, died of a sudden heart attack at 42, I was left with 3 children. Chris, who was 15, Mark, 12, and Carla, just 8. There was no time to wallow in grief. I had to be strong. I sold our bigger house, moved to a modest apartment, and returned to full-time work as a secretary. I did what was necessary. Chris was always my anchor. The eldest, forced to shoulder responsibilities too soon, helping with his younger siblings, always whispering, "It's going to be okay, Mom." On those nights, I found myself weeping silently in the kitchen. Perhaps that's why his silent rejection, standing there, still stings more than anything else. When Chris met Stephanie 12 years ago, I admit we weren't an instant match. She was starkly different from his previous girlfriends, fiercely driven, relentlessly ambitious, with opinions sharp as flint on everything. At our first family dinners, I felt her gaze on me, analyzing, cataloging my every perceived imperfection. Your mom's pretty traditional, isn't she? I once overheard her murmur to Chris, convinced I was out of earshot. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile, pretending not to hear the subtle bob. Over time, I learned to respect her. Ultimately, she made my son happy, and that was all that truly mattered. At their wedding 8 years ago, I insisted on helping with everything, even as I realized my suggestions were always, politely, bypassed. "Brenda, we appreciate the offer, but we've already hired a wedding planner," Stephanie would say, her smile polished, yet never quite reaching her eyes. When they announced they were expecting Theo 5 years ago, I wept with pure joy. My first grandchild. I bought so many things. Chris joked they'd need another apartment just for the presents. The first few months after Theo's birth were a different story. Suddenly, I was not just needed, I was indispensable. Stephanie, usually so fiercely independent, found herself utterly overwhelmed by the demands of a newborn. Chris called me almost daily. "Mom, can you come today? Steph hasn't slept a wink. Theo's got the colic." And I went. Every single time. I cancelled water aerobics, left my knitting group waiting, rescheduled coffee with my friends. Family first. I'd always believed that. I spent hours rocking Theo, prepared meals for the exhausted couple, washed mountains of tiny baby clothes, all so Stephanie could snatch a few hours of sleep. Chris would thank me with tight, grateful hugs. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom." Those were precious, sweet months. I felt truly useful, deeply loved, an essential thread in the fabric of their new family. But it didn't last. When Shio was about 8 months old, I started noticing subtle shifts, like a cold draft creeping under the door. Stephanie returned to work, and they hired a nanny. My visits, once welcomed with open arms, became scheduled. Brenda, can you come Tuesday? The nanny's off Wednesday and we need help. The invitations felt less like requests, more like directives. Gradually, the corrections began. Small at first, then increasingly frequent and cutting. "That's not how you hold a baby, Brenda," Stephanie would say, gently but firmly taking Theo from my arms to reposition him, as if I'd never held a baby before. "That's not the right way to feed him," she'd comment, her eyes on me as I tried to coax Theo to eat his mashed peas. "We don't want him to have sugar yet, Brenda," Chris would interject, a nervous edge to his voice, when I offered Theo a tiny crumb of my cake. Each correction felt like a fresh wound, each look of disapproval, a sharp cut. Yet I smiled, nodded and accepted. "Of course you're the parents. You know what's best." I swallowed my wounded pride, loved that family too fiercely to cause a fuss. The visits grew more spaced out. Calls asking for help, rarer still. When I did see them, I could feel the tension hanging in the air, a thick, unspoken barrier that hadn't existed before. For Theo's 4th birthday, they threw a grand party. I offered to help with the desserts. I'd always been complimented on my chocolate chip cookies and brownies, so I figured I could manage a simple cupcake. "No need, Brenda. We've hired a full children's catering service," Stephanie replied, her voice flat. On the day of the party, I arrived early anyway. I just wanted a quiet moment with my grandson before the impending chaos. I found the house teeming with strangers, Stephanie's colleagues, parents from Theo's preschool. "Grandma!" Theo shrieked, racing towards me, his small arms wrapping around my legs with that pure, boundless enthusiasm only children possess. I knelt, embracing him tightly, and presented his gift, a remote control car he'd spotted in a toy store window months ago. His little eyes glowed. "Look, Mommy, Grandma brought the car I wanted." Stephanie appeared beside us, her smile strained. "That's wonderful, sweetie. Now why don't you take it to your room and open it later with your other presents, okay?" Once Theo scampered off, she turned to me, her voice dropping. "Brenda, we agreed on simple gifts. Now he'll want to rip through everything before the party even starts." "I'm sorry, I just wanted to see his reaction." "And besides," she cut in, as if I hadn't spoken, "we're trying to teach him the value of things. That car costs almost half the nanny's salary." I was struck dumb. The words lodged in my throat. I wanted to scream that I'd saved for months to buy that present, that my retirement money was mine to spend as I pleased, that the sheer, unadulterated joy on my grandson's face was worth every single penny. Instead, I just mumbled another, "I'm sorry," and retreated to a lonely corner of the living room, feeling utterly out of place. When I tried to pour Theo some juice later, the nanny, a kind young woman who was merely doing her job, gently took the cup from my hand. "I've got it, Mrs. Evans. Stephanie prefers him to use the sippy cup." In that stark moment, the truth hit me with sickening clarity. I knew less about my grandson's daily routine than a hired employee. The next Christmas brought the hardest blow yet. We'd always spent it together. It was sacred tradition. I'd prepare the sprawling holiday dinner. Chris would pick up Mark and Carla with their families, and we'd all gather at his house, the largest. I'd sleep in the guest room, help with the post-holiday mess, and we'd stay together until New Year's. But that year, Chris called me 2 days before Christmas Eve. "Mom, this year we're doing something more intimate, just the 3 of us. Can we have lunch with you the day after?" I felt as if a fist had slammed into my stomach. "But it's Christmas, son. We've always spent it together." "I know, Mom. but Steph thinks we need to start our own traditions with Theo. You understand, right? His voice was hesitant, almost pleading for my understanding. Understand? How could I possibly understand being explicitly excluded from the most important family celebration of the year? How could I explain to Mark and Carla that family Christmas, as we knew it, was cancelled? Of course, son. I understand. I lied, the words a hollow whisper as hot tears streamed silently down my face. Thank God he couldn't see me. I spent Christmas Eve alone. I fixed a simple meal for myself. I turned on the television, desperate for some background noise. I leafed through old photo albums, reliving Christmases when Chris, still so small, could barely sleep from the sheer anticipation of presents. I remembered how his eyes would sparkle the next morning, how he always saved a piece of the Christmas breakfast pastry to eat on the morning of the 26th. The next day, I went to their house for lunch as planned. I brought presents for everyone, including a pecan pie that Chris adored. The lunch was cordial, yes, but stiffly formal, as if I were merely a casual acquaintance, not the mother, the grandmother, the woman who had once been the vibrant heart of that family. Theo, engrossed with his new toys, barely registered my presence. When I tried to engage him, Stephanie quickly intervened. He's a little tired today, Brenda. I think it's better to leave him quiet. I left earlier than planned, feigning a headache. In truth, I couldn't bear the feeling of being an unwelcome outsider a moment longer. The following months deepened the chasm between us. Visits dwindled. Calls became terse, fleeting. When I did see them, I felt like I was walking on eggshells, meticulously weighing every word, every gesture, terrified of making another misstep. Then came Chris's birthday, last month. 42 years old. The exact same age Frank was when he left me. Perhaps that's why I felt such a profound, almost desperate urgency to see my son that day. As always, I'd baked his favorite carrot cake with chocolate frosting. I didn't call ahead. I never had to before. It was our tradition. For 42 years on his birthday, I simply showed up with his surprise cake. When I arrived at their apartment door, I was buzzing with a fragile excitement. I'd spent the entire day lovingly preparing everything. I rang the doorbell, adjusting my hair with one hand, cradling the cake with the other. The door swung open, and there stood Stephanie, elegant in a lovely dress, her makeup impeccable. Behind her, I caught sight of the dining table set for two, wine glasses gleaming, candles flickering. The air practically hummed with quiet romance. Her expression upon seeing me quickly morphed from polite surprise into barely disguised irritation. "Brenda, this really isn't a good time," she said, her voice dry, dismissive. "But it's my son's birthday. I just brought his favorite cake," I replied, clutching the cake tighter, trying desperately to hold on to my smile, even as a deep sense of dread settled in my gut. That's when Chris appeared behind her. I immediately sensed his profound embarrassment. He was impeccably dressed, a crisp button-down shirt, his hair neatly combed. Clearly, he was prepared for a special evening that, just as clearly, did not include me. "Mom, we were going to call you tomorrow. Tonight, we're just celebrating the two of us." His voice was low, apologetic, but firm. My heart clenched painfully. "But I've always celebrated your birthday, son. Since the day you were born, I've never missed one." Stephanie took a sharp, audible breath, her irritation now boiling over. "Chris, just tell her." "Tell me what?" I asked, my voice already trembling, the prickle of tears starting behind my eyes. And that's when it happened. when the brutal words that opened this story were finally spoken. When the thin, fragile mask of politeness finally shattered. You don't have a place here anymore. Don't you see? We need space, privacy. You suffocate this family. I carefully placed the cake on the entry table. My hands trembled so violently, I thought I might shatter the platter. I couldn't say another word, even if I tried. The knot in my throat was a stone. I turned and walked out. I didn't run, didn't slam the door. I simply left, clinging to what little dignity remained, as tears blurred my vision and the world around me dissolved into a painful haze. The drive home was the longest of my life. I drove slowly, tears streaming silently down my face. Every red light was torture. Too much time to think, to feel, to remember. I remembered Chris as a newborn, so tiny in my arms. I remembered him at 6, when he broke his arm falling out of the backyard tree, and how tightly he clutched my hand the whole time at the hospital. I remembered him as a teenager, bringing me coffee in bed on Mother's Day, the liquid half spilled in the saucer because his hands weren't yet steady. And now, this 42-year-old man, who couldn't defend me, who stood silent as I was pushed out of his life. When I finally got home, the apartment felt emptier and quieter than ever before. I sat on the sofa, still in my coat, and let the crying come, raw and unrestrained. A cry that tore from a deep hidden place, a place that held not just the fresh pain of that night, but all the small, accumulated cuts from years of subtle rejections. The next morning, I woke with eyes swollen shut and a throbbing headache. I'd simply collapsed on the sofa, utterly exhausted from the night's deluge of tears. The phone rang, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to face anyone. I dragged myself to the kitchen, brewing coffee so strong it could raise the dead. As the water boiled, I stared out the window at the park across the street. A family was there. A father, a mother, a small child, and an older woman with gray hair, undeniably the grandmother. They were feeding the ducks, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. The grandmother held the child's hand, guiding him as he tossed pieces of bread. That simple, idyllic scene brought a vivid memory rushing back of a day not long ago when I took Theo to that very park. It was an autumn afternoon, golden leaves swirling around us. Theo, barely 3, was enchanted by everything. The ducks, the brittle leaves crunching under his tiny feet, the sweet lure of the cotton candy vendor. "Grandma, look! That duck has babies!" he'd shrieked, pointing to a mother duck trailed by 5 fluffy ducklings. "Those are her ducklings, Theo. She takes care of them, protects them, teaches them to swim," I'd explained, kneeling beside him. "Like you did with Daddy?" he'd asked, his wide, innocent eyes fixed on mine. That question, so pure, so direct, had caught me completely off guard. "Yes, my love, just like I did with your daddy. And when I grow up, you'll get old and I'll take care of you." He'd continued with that simple, unquestioning logic only a child possesses. My eyes had welled up then too. "Maybe, sweetheart, but Grandma's still got a lot of living left to do." "Good," he'd cheered, throwing his arms around my legs. "Because I like it when you take care of me." That day, we'd walked home hand in hand, Theo practically skipping, inventing fantastical stories about the park's ducks. When we arrived back at Chris and Stephanie's condo, my son was working remotely. "How was your adventure?" he'd asked, smiling at Theo's boundless energy. "It was amazing, Daddy. Grandma showed me the baby ducks and bought me cotton candy and let me jump in puddles. Chris had raised an eyebrow at me, a playful smirk touching his lips. Jump in puddles, Mom. Now I'll have to give him a bath. A little mud never killed anyone, I'd replied, grinning. Your dad let you do way worse things. For a fleeting moment, I'd seen a flash of my old Chris, that genuine, easy smile that used to light up his entire face. You're right. Remember when Dad let me drive Uncle Dave's tractor? I must have been 10. And you almost knocked down the barn. I'd finished, laughing at the memory. We'd laughed together, and for that brief, beautiful instant, I'd felt the deep connection that seemed to be slipping away. But then Stephanie had arrived home from work, spotted Theo's muddy boots in the hallway, and shot me that familiar, sharp look of disapproval. Brenda, we agreed he wouldn't jump in puddles anymore. Last time he caught a cold that lasted a week. And just like that, the moment was gone. The fragile connection shattered. Chris reverted to the serious adult man, perpetually torn between pleasing his wife and avoiding upsetting his mother. Back in the present, I turned away from the window and the park that now held a bittersweet, aching beauty. My coffee had gone cold. Bitter, like life, sometimes. The phone rang again. This time, I answered. It was Carla, my youngest daughter. Mom? I'm worried. I called last night and you didn't pick up. I was just tired, honey. Went to bed early. I didn't want to tell her what had happened. Not yet. Are you sure? Your voice sounds off. Always so perceptive, my Carla. Even over the phone, she could sense when something wasn't right. Just a restless night. I lied again. How are the kids? We chatted for a few minutes about trivial things. My grandkids' school grades, Carla's new project at work. When we hung up, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Carla and Mark never made me feel like a burden. Why was it so agonizingly different with Chris? I spent the rest of the day in a numb limbo. I couldn't focus on anything. Not the television, not my books, not the crossword puzzles that usually offered a pleasant escape. My mind relentlessly rewound to that devastating scene at Chris's apartment door. That night, I took a sleeping pill, something I rarely did. I just needed to silence the relentless chatter in my head, at least for a few hours. The next few days bled into a blur. Chris called multiple times. I let every single call go to voicemail. His messages were always the same, a desperate refrain. Mom, we need to talk. Please pick up. Stephanie sent a message too, a short, clipped text. Brenda, I think I overreacted the other day. We were planning a special night, and your visit caught us off guard. Hope you understand. It wasn't a real apology, not even a glimmer of acknowledgement for how deeply her words had wounded me. Just a justification, as if the problem lay solely with me showing up unannounced, not with the awful, unforgivable things she'd said. On the 4th day after the incident, a call came that I couldn't ignore. It was Theo, using Chris's cell phone. Grandma! It's Theo. That sweet, innocent little voice nearly shattered my resolve to maintain my distance. Hi, sweetie. What a wonderful surprise to hear from you. Why don't you come over anymore, Grandma? Are you sick? A lump formed in my throat, thick and painful. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that his grandma isn't welcome in his own home? No, honey. Grandma's just very busy with a few things. But you'll come soon, right? I have a new drawing to show you. It's a dinosaur with butterfly wings. I swallowed back the rush of tears. Of course I will, my love. Soon. Real soon. And I absolutely can't wait to see that butterfly dinosaur. Daddy wants to talk to you, he said, and before I could protest, I heard Chris's strained voice. Mom? Please, don't hang up. I remained silent, clutching the phone, not knowing what to say. Mom, I'm so sorry about what happened. Steph wasn't having a good day. She didn't mean to say those things. His voice was laced with an apology that felt hollow. But she did, Chris. And you didn't do a single thing to defend me. I know, I was stunned. You know how Steph gets when she's upset. What I know is, I was humiliated on your doorstep, on your birthday, bringing the special carrot cake I've made you since you were a little boy. Mom, please, let's talk in person. Can I come over this afternoon? I'm not ready, Chris. I need time. How much time? I don't know, just give me space, please. When we hung up, I cried again. But this time, amidst the tears of fresh hurt, there was also a sharp, unfamiliar stab of anger. Anger at myself. Anger for having allowed things to reach this agonizing point. For having erased myself so thoroughly, for so long, that now I didn't know what my place in the world was beyond being a mother-in-law, a grandmother. It was then I remembered Sharon, my younger sister, a widow like me, but one who'd forged a completely different path after losing her husband. While I dedicated myself entirely to my children, she had bravely rebuilt her own life. She'd moved to St. Petersburg, Florida, cultivated new friendships, taken up yoga, even had a boyfriend for a while. Something I'd never even allowed myself to consider after Frank. Sharon had always invited me to visit, to stay for long stretches. You need to see the ocean, Brenda. It's good for the soul, she used to say, and I'd always replied that I couldn't, that the boys needed me, that I had to help with the grandkids. I picked up the phone and called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice brimming with that vibrant energy I'd always secretly envied. Brenda, what a lovely surprise. I was just thinking about you. Hi, Sharon. How are things down there? Wonderful, as always. Winter's coming, but we still have glorious sunny days. Just yesterday, I went for a walk on the beach with my group. There's a new lady, Marlene. I think you'd absolutely adore her. She was a teacher, just like you. I smiled, picturing my sister surrounded by her new friends, all in brightly colored activewear, striding along the shoreline. Sharon, I'm thinking of taking you up on your offer. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. What offer, Brenda? To come down there, not just to visit. Maybe to move. Brenda, finally! It's about time you broke free from that apartment full of sad memories. Down here, there's ocean, there's sunshine, there's life. It's not just about the apartment, Sharon. I think I need a fresh start. And then I told her everything. About the escalating tension with Chris and Stephanie. About the quiet humiliations, the endless corrections. And finally, about the brutal scene on his birthday night. My sister, always fiercely direct, didn't mince words. That daughter-in-law has always been a snake, Brenda. And your son, forgive me for saying it, but he's being an ungrateful jerk, after everything you've done for him. I don't want to judge anyone, Sharon. I just want to find a place where I don't feel like a burden. Here, you'll have your own space, your own life. And when they miss you, because they will miss you, you'll be too busy enjoying life to care. We laughed together, and for the first time in days, I felt a tiny, precious spark of hope flicker to life. Maybe Sharon was right. Maybe it was time to finally think about myself, for the first time in decades. "Are you sure I won't be a bother down there?" I asked, still a whisper of hesitation in my voice. "A bother? Brenda, you'll help me enjoy it even more. There are so many places I want to show you, so many people to introduce you to. And my condo has a guest room that's practically been waiting for you. I've told you to come so many times. I need to figure out how to do it. Sell the apartment, organize the move. You don't have to sell now. Rent it out first. See if you adapt. If you don't like it, which is impossible, you can always come back. But you'll love it, I'm sure." When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. A surge of genuine enthusiasm. A small, persistent flame of anticipation for the future, finally eclipsing the heavy weight of the past. In the days that followed, I threw myself into organizing the move. I meticulously sorted through my belongings, deciding what to take, what to donate, what to store away. I called a real estate agent to list my apartment for rent. I told Mark and Carla about my plans. Both were surprised, but unequivocally supportive. "If this is what's going to make you happy, Mom, go for it," Carla said, her voice a little shaky. "But I'm really going to miss you." "St. Petersburg isn't that far," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "And you can always visit me for vacations. There's plenty of beach for the kids." Mark was more practical, as always. "Want me to help you with the move? I can take a few days off next month." "Thanks, honey, but I think I'll only be taking a few things. Sharon's condo is already furnished." "What about Chris? Have you told him yet?" I hesitated. "Not yet. We haven't really been talking since that night." Mark sighed, a heavy sound. "He's always been your favorite, Mom. And look how he treats you." "Don't say that, honey. I love all of you equally," I retorted, perhaps a little too quickly. But deep down, I knew there was an uncomfortable truth in Mark's blunt words. Chris had always held a singular place in my heart, perhaps because he was the oldest, forced to assume so many responsibilities so early, after his father passed. Or maybe because of all my children, he was the one who most resembled Frank. Not just physically, but in the cadence of his laugh, the way he walked, even the quiet intensity in his eyes. And now, this son I loved so profoundly was the architect of the greatest pain I'd ever felt. A week after I'd begun the concrete preparations for the move, I received an unexpected call. It was Sharon again, but her voice was different, hushed, almost conspiratorial. "Brenda, don't be mad at me." I immediately stiffened. "What did you do, Sharon?" "I called Chris." My stomach plummeted. "Why?" "Because he's your son, Brenda. And because he needs to know what he's losing. I told him you're moving here, that you're going to start fresh, build a new life away from him." "Sharon, I was going to tell him in my own time, my own way." "And when would that be?" "When your bags were already at the airport. He needs to understand the gravity of what he did. And from what I could tell on the call, he understood." "What did he say?" "He was quiet for a while. Then he asked if it was definitive. I told him yes, that you were already getting everything organized. He seemed shaken. I wasn't sure whether to be furious with my sister for meddling or profoundly grateful she'd done what I hadn't had the courage to do myself. "He's going to come looking for you," Sharon continued, her voice firm. "Be prepared." And she was right. The very next day, with almost everything packed, Chris showed up at my door. Unannounced, ironically. He looked haggard, his hair disheveled, just like when he was a troubled teenager. "Mom, Aunt Sharon called me. Is it true you're moving?" "Yes," I replied, a calm I didn't even know I possessed settling over me. "You all need space, and I need a place where I'm truly welcome." "But you don't have to go that far. It was just an argument. Steph was stressed." "Chris, it wasn't just an argument. It was the last straw. For months, even years, I felt like I'm in the way in your lives. Like I'm an inconvenience, not a help." "That's not true, Mom. You're important to us, to Theo." As he spoke, a memory surfaced, clear and sharp from years ago, when Chris was still in college. He'd just endured a brutal breakup and came home utterly devastated. We sat in the kitchen, sipping hot chocolate, just like we had when he was a boy. "How did you know Dad was the one, Mom?" he'd asked, his eyes still red-rimmed from crying. "I didn't know right away," I'd answered, honest. "Your dad was handsome, charming, yes, but also stubborn and sometimes difficult. What made me certain was realizing that with him, I could simply be myself. I didn't have to pretend, didn't have to make myself smaller. He saw me, Chris. He truly saw me." "And after he passed, you never thought about finding someone else?" The question had caught me off guard. "Not at first. The grief was too heavy. Later, I suppose I just got used to being only a mom. You all needed me so much, there wasn't room for anything else." "But what about now, Mom? We're all grown. Don't you feel lonely?" I remembered hesitating then. "Sometimes, but I have you all. I have my friends, my activities." "It's not the same as having a partner, Mom. Someone who's just yours." That conversation had stayed with me for a long time. It was one of the rare occasions my son had shown genuine concern for my happiness, not just what I could do for him or his siblings. Back in the present, I looked at my son, now a 42-year-old man, and saw the boy I'd once cradled in my arms. But I also saw the adult who had allowed me to be humiliated on his own doorstep. "Chris," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You know what hurts the most? It wasn't Stephanie's words. It was your silence." He had no answer for that. We simply stood in silence for a long moment, the crushing weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy between us. "I love you, Mom," he finally choked out, his voice thick with raw emotion. "I'll always love you." "I love you too, son. I always will. But I've learned that loving also means giving space. And most importantly, I've learned that I need to find my own place in this world again." Before he left, he pulled me into a tight embrace, a hug deeper and more desperate than any he'd given me in years. I felt his tears wet my shoulder. I cried too, but these weren't just tears of sorrow anymore. There was something more there. Perhaps the dawning of acceptance, a quiet understanding that sometimes we must step away to find a new path forward. After Chris left, I sank onto the couch and stared at the closed door for a long time. A part of me, the old, clinging part, yearned to run after him, to tell him I'd changed my mind, that I'd stay, that I'd endure anything, any slight, just to remain close to him, to Theo. But another part, a resilient core that was growing stronger every day, knew I had to move forward. For myself, this time, not for anyone else. That night, I dreamed of Frank. We were young again, walking hand in hand along the beach. A beautiful stretch of sand. We'd never actually visited together in life. He smiled at me, that gentle, knowing smile that had always melted my heart. "You're doing the right thing, Brenda. he said in the dream. It's time to live your life. I woke with fresh tears in my eyes, but also a profound sense of peace I hadn't felt in years, as if I'd finally received a blessing. Today is my last day in this apartment. My bags are packed, the furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts. What I couldn't take, I donated or placed in storage. Tomorrow I fly to St. Petersburg, Florida. Sharon will pick me up at the airport. She's already got the guest room ready, which will soon be my room. She says there's a group of ladies who walk on the beach every morning, and that she'll introduce me to all the neighbors. Last night, I had an unexpected visitor. It was Stephanie, alone, without Chris or Theo. "Can I come in?" she asked, looking profoundly uncomfortable on my doorstep. I hesitated, a moment of instinctual defensiveness, but then stepped aside. She entered, her eyes sweeping over the boxes and stripped-down rooms. "So it's true. You're really leaving?" "Yes, tomorrow." We stood in a dense, awkward silence for a few moments, the unspoken history between us filling the air. Finally, she spoke. "Brenda, I came to apologize. What I said that night was cruel and unfair." I was genuinely surprised by her admission. Stephanie was not one to concede fault easily. "Why now, Stephanie? Why only when I'm on my way out?" She sighed, a sound heavy with something that almost sounded like regret. "Because I'm too proud, and because maybe deep down I did want you to back off. But not like this. Not so far away." "What did you expect?" I challenged, my voice sharper than I intended. "That I'd keep showing up even knowing I wasn't welcome?" "It's not that you weren't welcome, Brenda. It's just, I always felt judged by you, like nothing I did as a mother, as a wife, was ever quite good enough in your eyes." That accusation caught me completely off guard. "Judged? Stephanie, I always respected your decisions with Theo, with the house. Maybe not with words, but with looks, with sighs. When you'd pick Theo up a certain way and I'd ask you to do it differently, you'd obey. But I saw it in your eyes. You thought I was wrong." I reflected on her words truly. Was there some truth in them? Had I, without even realizing, conveyed disapproval? Had my fierce love for Chris and Theo, my desire to protect them, subtly morphed into a form of control, of quiet judgment? "It was never my intention to make you feel that way," I finally said, the words heavy with a dawning realization. "I just wanted to help, to be a part of your lives." "I know, and Chris knows too. He's devastated about all this." "Then why didn't he come with you?" "Because I asked to come alone. I needed to say this to you, woman to woman, and because..." She hesitated, her gaze distant. "Because I think part of the problem has always been Chris getting caught squarely in the middle of us too, trying desperately to please both of us and, in the end, pleasing no one." Again, her words carried an uncomfortable, undeniable truth. How many times had I quietly complained to Chris about something Stephanie did or said? How many times had I implicitly, perhaps even unknowingly, placed my son in that impossible position of choosing between his mother and his wife? "Do you think there's still a way to fix this?" I asked, unsure of what answer I was even hoping for. "I don't know, Brenda. Maybe this time apart will be good for all of us. For you to find your own space, your own purpose, and for us to learn to value your presence for what it is, instead of viewing it as an intrusion." When Stephanie left, I sat for a long time, contemplating our conversation. It wasn't the sweeping reconciliation a part of me had secretly yearned for. There were no grand promises that everything would magically revert to how it once was. But there was a mutual acknowledgement of mistakes, of fractured communication, of deeply unmet expectations. And perhaps that was more honest, more real, than a forced hug and empty assurances. This morning, I received a call from Chris. "Mom, can I take you to the airport tomorrow?" "I've already called a cab, son. Please," he urged, his voice softer than I'd heard it in ages. "I want to say goodbye properly, and Theo wants to too." How could I possibly deny myself one last moment with my grandson? "All right, my flight's at 10 a.m. We'll be there by 7:30. Now, looking out the window of my apartment for the very last time, I see the park where I took my children when they were small, where more recently I took Theo. So many memories etched into this place, so many stories whispered within these walls. I'm not running away, I'm starting over. At 67, I've discovered I still have time to build a life where I'm not just the convenient mother, the encroaching mother-in-law, or the troublesome grandmother. A life where I am simply Brenda, with all the nuances and possibilities that name entails. Tomorrow, when Chris and Theo come to pick me up, there will be no recriminations, no lingering demands. Just a hug, a kiss, the quiet promise of calls and visits, and the silent understanding that sometimes we need to step back to create distance in order to find a new, healthier balance. Because in the end, true love doesn't trap, doesn't suffocate, doesn't demand. True love grants wings, offers space, gifts freedom, and perhaps that's what I forgot over the years. That loving my children didn't mean living solely for them, but also finally for myself. As I zip up the last suitcase, I feel a complex mix of sadness and anticipation. Sadness for what I leave behind, anticipation for what lies ahead. And amidst it all, a profound certainty I carry within me. No matter the distance, no matter the past disagreements, love remains. Transformed, perhaps, different from what I once imagined, but still, undeniably, love. And with that certainty in my heart, I'm ready to turn the page and begin a new chapter. A chapter where I will be the protagonist of my own story, not merely a supporting character in others.